More than a decade and a half after his last match, the dust from the Stone Cold era seems to have barely settled. Thanks to constant reminders in the form of commemorative DVDs, WWE Network specials, guest appearances, and the fact that all post-Attitude Era wrestling is unfairly compared to these golden times, the shadow of Steve Austin casts darkness over the wrestling we watch today. To be fair, it's understandable why. Austin changed the game forever. His presence on WWE shows 20 years ago was a revelation, a distorted funhouse mirror version of Hulkamania heroism that traded pythons and protein shakes for middle fingers and Steveweisers. The weekly dose of mayhem that Austin brought to Raw is War made WWE must-see television, more than any 20-minute 4.5-star match ever could. But while Austin was best known as an episodic moment machine, one whose lawlessness defined an era, he was also a damn good in-ring performer. Stone Cold could wrestle with the finest technicians just as much as he could brawl in the craziest of circumstances. His storytelling in any form was where he was most masterful, and while his career is mostly defined by gleeful destruction and defiance of authority, he was also a wrestler's wrestler by any measure of the art. I'm Jack from Cultaholic.com, and these are 10 Stone Cold Steve Austin matches you need to see. Join us. Number 10, Steve Austin versus Savio Vega, In Your House, Beware of Dog. Austin's pre-316 time in WWE doesn't really get enough love, partially because it was only a 6-month stretch that saw him silently relegated to the desolate mid-card. While he wasn't the icy hellraiser that he would soon become, Austin did have some inspired moments in those quieter times, one of which was an exceptionally brutal match that doesn't get nearly enough credit. Austin and Vega had feuded for months, and their blow-off was this Caribbean strap match that would feature both men whipping each other red and raw for much of the match's duration. And considering that the match was over 20 minutes long, you're talking about some serious whipping. It's as violent as a match without blood could possibly be, and it was definitely the best WWE match for Savio Vega, who was one of the more underrated talents of his time. For a good look at the early days of Stone Cold, it doesn't really get much better than this. Number 9, Steve Austin versus The Rock, Backlash 1999. There was always magic when Rock and Austin were in the ring together, which was to be expected from two all-time greats that never phoned it in. Coming 4 weeks after their WrestleMania 15 main event saved that particular show, they managed to top that performance with an even more inspired brawl that was right in line with the madcap main events of the era. Especially unforgettable was the spot where The Rock, still the cocky heel that we all kinda loved anyway, snatched one of the TV cameras and began panning around while standing on the announce table, only to turn and find Austin, who flipped him off and stunned him while The Rock still held the camera. It's those little touches that add to a great match, especially one like this that featured more and more melodrama as it went on. When you combine Austin, Rock, drama, and creativity, you've got a winning formula in hand for certain. Number 8, Austin versus Ricky Steamboat, Clash of the Champions, August 24th, 1994. As great as Stone Cold was, Austin's brilliance as Stunning Steve is ruefully overlooked. That version of Austin could have been the third member of a well-pushed revival, blending smooth science with heel 101 better than any of his peers. Austin's success as a tag team and single star in WCW speaks for itself, and his peak was this United States title defense against the Wily Dragon. Matching Steamboat's fire and determination with Austin's hubris and overconfidence made for another potent brew, as Steamboat, even aged 41, could keep up with prime Austin, almost 12 years his junior. The amount of near falls towards the end of this match would leave even onlookers feeling short of breath, as these two were absolute masters at working the crowd. Steamboat would retire shortly afterwards due to back issues, which were evident late in the contest, but he went out with an absolute gem. That is until he came back to wrestle Chris Jericho, and we all realized that he still very much had it. As for Austin, it's pretty hard to argue that this was his best non-WWE work. Number 7, Steve Austin vs. Kurt Angle, SummerSlam 2001. This one can be considered near the top of the category Match of the Year candidates that had FU finishes. Just 1 year prior, it would have been unthinkable that Austin could play the shortcut-taking cowardly champion with Angle as the Terminator-like machine that keeps shaking off massive damage. But here they were, and the crowd in San Jose was buying every second of it. That is until the screwy DQ finish kinda low-bridged everyone's fun. Austin's 2001 run as the hesitant, overcompensating champion was truly inspired character work, especially from a man that made millions as the equivalent of an action hero, even if many of the fans at the time weren't exactly digging his bad guy act. But in hindsight, it's worth going back and looking at just how much Austin was willing to change for the sake of his art, and how he put everything he had into his heel role. The match with Angle demonstrated just how effectively both men had shifted into opposite roles, like a bloodstained Freaky Friday. Perhaps with the benefit of hindsight, Austin's performances from this time can be more greatly appreciated. We certainly hope so. Number 6, Steve Austin vs. Chris Benoit, SmackDown, May 31st, 2001. It was rare during Austin's run at the top of WWE for him to engage in matches that were heavier on pure wrestling, due to the Attitude Era's MO catering towards interference, weapons, brawling in the crowd, and all that sort of thing. But when Austin turned heel in 2001, we began to see him working once more in matches that didn't rely so much on endless strings of chaos. This match with Benoit in Edmonton proved just how great Austin could still be as an actual wrestler. Austin and Benoit called much of this lengthy battle in inside the ring, with Austin giving so much to Benoit in the way of shine and offense. It really was like an old NWA title defense, with Austin assuming the role of a barnstorming Ric Flair, Austin's favorite wrestler of all time, defending the gold against a local territorial star, while doing his best to try and survive in hostile foreign territory. Matches like this are the ideal blend of old school and new, and it's easily one of the best matches in the history of SmackDown. Number 5, Stone Cold Steve Austin vs. Bret Hart, Survivor Series 1996. Calling this the other Bret Austin match would sound like a flippant dismissal, and that wouldn't really be right. Although it does pale mildly towards the more famous match between the Hitman and the Rattlesnake, the first major meeting between these two wrestling icons was more than worthy of its Madison Square Garden location, and is arguably the best match in Survivor Series' 3-decade history. It's a brawl in many ways, with the angry Austin trying to beat down the veteran Hart to establish his idea of what the pecking order should look like, but there's also much more technique than you might expect given the intensity of this feud. Austin tried to force Hart into submission, wrestling neck and neck with the ex-champion, explicitly revealing that Austin's months of boasts about being better than Bret weren't entirely without merit. This match felt like a genuine competition between two aces, jockeying to outmaneuver one another with pride and ego at stake. The Stone Cold that would turn the Monday Night ratings tide wasn't fully evident here, as this is a decidedly different but no less awesome version of Steve Austin. Number 4, Steve Austin vs. Dude Love, Over the Edge 1998. Those who watched Austin fight against truly unfair odds in his WWE title defense against Dude Love, with Vince McMahon as referee and the Stooges manning the ringside area, were left to wonder how in the hell Stone Cold was going to survive with his title intact. A match like this had never really been presented beforehand, so there was plenty of stomach-turning intrigue in the build-up and execution. In many ways, this match was both a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing in that the drama, action, and twists were absolutely flawless, leaving the fans in Milwaukee's Bradley Center on their feet screaming the whole way through. Jim Ross was also on point on commentary, maybe even his finest work ever. But it's also a curse because so many matches have since tried to rip off this evil ref / millions of twists formula since then, all paling in comparison to the original, except maybe Backlash 2000, but Austin was involved in that one as well, so we can give it a pass. This was what you might call an audience match, or maybe a sports entertainment match, and not one wrong note was played. Everything from Pat Patterson's over-the-top intros to the heart-stopping final sequence hit its mark. Number 3, Steve Austin vs. Triple H, 3 Stages of Hell, No Way Out 2001. When we ranked Triple H's most must-see matches some time ago, this one was near the top of the list, and for good reason. All you can really ask out of two sworn enemies that have tried to compromise each other's lives at times is a match that properly conveys the complete lack of regard they have for each other's safety. Safe to say that Austin and Triple H's 3 Stages of Hell match in 2001 fully achieved that. The two main eventers kept the intensity at full throttle for 40 minutes, busting each other up in a manner that was both realistic and logical, while also violent and harrowing. This wasn't a modern-style main event where both guys have to get their stuff in while exchanging false finishes. This was a gritty, nasty fight between two men that really had you believing that they hated each other's guts. This match was, at the same time, both complex and simple, and through both measures, it was exceedingly effective. Number 2, Steve Austin vs. The Rock, WrestleMania 17, or X7 if you want to be new metal about it. Yes, if this entry doesn't make you want to fire up Limp Bizkit's My Way on Spotify right now, then we at Cultaholic have failed you. Fred Durst never sounded better than when he was waxing lyrical over Steve Austin's absolute need to defeat The Rock for the WWE Championship. The iconic video package also featured both men hitting each other with their finishers and each other's finishers in the weeks leading up to that fateful day at the Reliant Astrodome in Houston, Texas. This match was going to be historic. We just had no concept of how historic at the time. Austin and Rock fought back and forth, administering blows to each other's heads and bodies, as well as their egos. Each man's pride took a hit when they found themselves having to kick out of their own finishing moves, as well as fighting blood loss and exhaustion while trapped in painful submission holds. The interjection of Vince McMahon in the climactic moments etches this match firmly in history as the moment the lights of the Attitude Era were finally turned out. But however you feel about that shouldn't really matter, because this was an epic brawl worthy of closing out the greatest WrestleMania of all time. And finally, number 1, Steve Austin vs. Bret Hart, WrestleMania 13. So much groundwork for the future of wrestling was laid in this one match, running third from the top of an otherwise lifeless WrestleMania. Going in, Bret was still the designated hero, albeit a morally conflicted one. Austin was still the villain, but an increasingly beloved one. Through the course of a relentless fight to the near death, both men migrated across the invisible line in opposite directions, a double turn, a shift that would catapult Stone Cold into the stratosphere for good. That launch may not have been as effective had the match not been so incredible, only the third WWE match to that point that Dave Meltzer personally awarded a 5-star rating to. Of course, Meltzer wasn't the only person that came to that conclusion. It is universally hailed as one of the greatest matches ever, not just at WrestleMania, ever. A bloody Austin's dramatic effort to break the sharpshooter with rivulets of his own blood streaming down his strained face are as iconic an image as anything else in the history of the business. This match is a masterpiece and remains Exhibit A as to why Stone Cold Steve Austin became the biggest star in professional wrestling. So there you have it, that is our list of 10 Steve Austin matches you most need to see. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com, and do not forget to leave your own favourite Steve Austin matches in the comments section down below. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to at Jack the Jobber. You can follow all of us generally at Cultaholic, and if you want to as well, you can check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Cultaholic. And never forget, of course, if you haven't done so already, to hit subscribe and to join us.